All right, I think we're going to get started. Thank you again for joining us today. Welcome to Lobbying 101, a 1-hour-long webinar where we'll answer all your questions about speaking to your legislators and being an effective pro-choice Catholic advocate. My name is Marley Breakstone. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the State Policy Associate at Catholics for Choice. In this role, I work with partner organizations, coalitions, and Catholic state legislators around the country to fight policies and advocate for policies that truly reflect what Catholics in the US want and need. I also focus on outreach, recruitment, and engagement of our activist network.
Thanks, Marley. I am Shannon Russell. I also use she, her pronouns, and I am thrilled to introduce myself as the new Director of Policy at Catholics for Choice. My title is fairly self-explanatory in that I'm proud to work with folks like Marley to lead CFC's policy work. After working with policy staff at the National Council of Jewish Women, the Center for Reproductive Rights, NARAL Pro-Choice America, and the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, my expertise is at the intersection of faith and reproductive health rights and justice. And I'm so excited to speak to all of you today about one of my favorite parts of my job, which is lobbying, or more simply, talking to your legislators and their staff about what matters to you most. I'll also give you more information about a federal bill that's more timely than ever now that the Supreme Court is poised to dismantle our right to access abortion, the Women's Health Protection Act, or WIPA.
And we are also joined today by the lovely Jessica, a pro-choice Catholic from Massachusetts and a graduate from Mount Holyoke College. She currently works at a Massachusetts foundation as a research and evaluation specialist, and previously spent 5 years at the Massachusetts State House working on climate, energy, education, and veterans policy. In May, she'll officially hold a master's in public policy and administration, focusing on nonprofit public management from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Jessica attended Catholics for Choice's Advocacy Summit Retreat in 2019, during which we held a day-long lobby day, and is here today to tell us about her experiences working with CFC and speaking to elected officials as a pro-choice Catholic. Furthermore, based on her experience working in an office in the State House, Jessica will be able to tell us a little bit more about just how important it is to talk to your elected officials and make sure that they hear from people like you about the issues that matter the most. So before we get started, let's quickly go over some general logistics and housekeeping rules. Since this is a Zoom webinar, you'll be unable to chat the general audience, show yourselves on camera, or unmute your mics. But please keep in mind that at the end, there will be a Q&A session for both the CFC staff and Jessica. So if you have any questions or concerns, or if you just want to ask a question to be answered during the Q&A portion, you can submit those using the Q&A function on Zoom. This webinar will also be recorded and will be sent out to registrants later this week, and you'll also be able to view it on YouTube. So now what we've all been looking forward to, let's talk a little bit more about lobbying. With the Supreme Court poised to overturn Roe versus Wade and states across the country continuing to dismantle our fundamental right to bodily autonomy, communicating with our legislators and their staff directly, also known as lobbying, is crucial. Telling our stories and speaking up as pro-choice Catholics helps to fight misconceptions that many people, including your lawmakers, have about who Catholics are, the values they hold, and what they believe. We can't let anti-abortion lawmakers sit in an echo chamber of misinformation. As Catholics, we must strive to enact policies that protect and advance the right of every person to access comprehensive, affordable, compassionate, and equitable abortion care in whatever setting they choose and at whatever time they choose. By communicating with your lawmakers, you have the power to influence the way they speak and vote on policies. This is largely about building a relationship with your elected officials and letting them know that you, their constituent, believe. Anyone can meet with their elected officials, including people of all ages, genders, and backgrounds. You can meet with elected officials and their staffs on your own or with a group of your peers. And while lobbying and advocacy may seem daunting at first, remember that you are the expert on your own personal views and experiences, and that your opinion truly matters. Elected officials would not be in office without constituents like you.
So throughout the year, Catholics for Choice will organize lobby days, both virtually and hopefully one day, once it's safe, to return to Capitol Hill in person to mark major policy moments and to make this process as easy as possible for activists like you. So we'll take care of communicating with congressional offices, scheduling meetings, and drafting talking points. Then all you need to do to make your voice heard is to jump on Zoom like we have today. So the first of our virtual lobby days this year will focus on WIPA, the Women's Health Protection Act, as you can see on your screen, which is a critical bill that would safeguard abortion access nationwide. Over the past decade, as you know, states across the country have passed nearly 500 laws blatantly designed to undermine long-held constitutional rights and to single out abortion for regulation that applies to no similar medical care. These cruel and dangerous policies restrict or outright ban abortion care, limit who and where care can be provided, force providers to perform unnecessary services and to deliver inaccurate, biased counseling, mandate waiting periods and parental interference with personal decision-making, all with the express purpose of increasing costs, decreasing the number of clinics and providers, or delaying or entirely blocking access to abortion care. You've probably heard a lot about Texas Senate Bill 8, which represents an extreme example of these heinous laws, but it's far from the first attempt to eliminate abortion access in the United States. And unfortunately, it won't be the last. So indeed, as a result of this relentless attack on reproductive freedom, abortion access has already been reduced or even eliminated in large segments of the nation, particularly for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, those working to make ends meet, members of the LGBTQ community, immigrants, young people, those living in rural communities, and people with disabilities. Abortion restrictions are part of intertwined systems of oppression that deny BIPOC access to constitutional rights and are inherently rooted in anti-Black racism, white supremacy, and other forms of discrimination. These sinful structures of systemic racism, gender inequality, economic insecurity, and immigration restrictions are inherently antithetical to our faith tradition and to the principles of equality, liberty, and justice that our nation was founded upon. As Catholics, we're called to advocate for policies that advance the human rights of those who are most vulnerable and marginalized and who are most harmed by abortion restrictions. All people deserve safe healthcare services, as well as support and kindness from us, their fellow community members, not judgment and shame. We value all individuals as moral agents, free to make their own personal choices about their lives, families, and futures with dignity and without political interference. A compassionate nation must ensure that every single person can access timely and quality care from trusted providers, regardless of who they are, how much they earn, or where they live. The theoretical legal right to abortion has never been enough, right? And it's time for Congress to pass legislation that guarantees that abortion is available and affordable to anyone who seeks it. Thankfully, WIPA is that law. The bill would create a statutory right for providers to deliver abortion care and a corresponding right for their patients to receive that care free from medically unnecessary restrictions. Importantly, the bill would also establish clear guidance for courts considering whether a requirement impedes access to abortion care in violation of the law. As you can see on your screen, a strong majority of voters, 61%, and a broad coalition of organizations, including over 100 faith-based organizations, support this legislation. The House passed WIPA last year on September 24th. Now it's the Senate's turn. On January 20th, Catholics for Choice will be virtually meeting with Senate offices to encourage them to hold a vote on and pass this bill, finally. Texans can't wait, and neither can people seeking abortion access across the country. We welcome all pro-choice Catholics and people of faith to join us, and there's still time to register. I'll drop the link in the chat. Now I'll hand it back to Marley to discuss the nitty-gritty of what we'll be up to on January 20th and anytime that we lobby. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Shannon. So now let's start off by talking a little bit how we can best prepare for meetings and effectively advocate for policies as pro-choice Catholics, either with us during our upcoming lobby day or at some other time. Over the course of the pandemic, congressional staff has actually become more accessible than ever, connecting with their constituents across the country, just like yourselves, over the phone and online. While lobbying virtually means doing away with some logistical headaches like getting to Capitol Hill or to your state houses and finding the correct office and trying to navigate all of that, it does bring its own challenges. So before your meeting, you should review relevant Catholics for Choice materials to make sure that you are prepared for the language and that you have all the information you need to communicate your opinions. Catholics for Choice has talking points on the Women's Health Protection Act, and we'll share that document with all of the lobby day participants, as well as a link to take action. And we'll also send that in the follow-up email that you'll get after this webinar so that you can learn more about the bill that we've been talking about, one of the most important that we're advocating for right now. Other talking points and statistics, research, articles pertaining to the Women's Health Protection Act, and other topics and resources can also be found on our Catholics for Choice website. The link for this resource center will also be sent to you. So in addition to preparing yourself with this knowledge that you can get from doing your own research about the bill and the topic itself, it might also be a good idea to do some background research and investigate what your lawmakers have done on this bill or on this issue in the past. So if you have some additional time before your meeting to do this research and you're interested, you can search for the lawmakers' press statements, look at their website, their social media, maybe check some local news for information about their stance on reproductive freedom, and do your own research about their history and background so that you can connect with them when you're talking about these issues. A lot of the time, it's as easy as searching the name of your lawmaker and the word abortion in Google. So for example, if I was meeting with Joe Biden on our lobby day, I would just Google Joe Biden abortion, and I would probably find a lot of useful information about his stance on the policies. It might also help to learn more about your lawmakers' personal and professional backgrounds to help you frame the conversation. So for example, if your lawmaker is a doctor, you can use talking points that emphasize abortion as safe and essential healthcare. If they're a lawyer, you can stress that the constitutional right to abortion is a long settled law, and that placing unnecessary restrictions on abortion care violates our American First and 14th Amendment. If they're a person of faith, you can talk to them about your values and why you as a Catholic advocate for abortion access. But it's a good idea to find something that you can connect on with them on a personal level. Also, if time allows, you can assign meeting roles. It's a good idea if you're meeting with your legislator with a group rather than alone to assign and designate someone who could handle introductions, someone else who can give background information, someone who can share their personal story, someone to make the ask to the legislator, and someone to wrap up the meeting. And again, if you're lobbying by yourself, you're welcome to take on all roles, but if you're with a group, it is the most efficient and organized to designate these roles. And then last but not least, you should practice before the meetings. You should practice using the technology, making sure that you're acquainted with Zoom. You should practice greeting the legislator and introducing yourself. You should practice making the ask, in this case, asking them to support the Women's Health Protection Act. And you can practice wrapping up the meeting and telling them about your follow-up. And remember, you don't have to be an expert to lobby. Congressional staff truly values meeting with their constituents because yours are the views and opinions that really matter to them. Your role as a constituent is not to be a professional lobbyist, but instead to represent your views, tell your story, and battle misconceptions about the larger Catholic community.
So now we're going to get into the visit itself. If you've never lobbied before, simply think of your visit as a conversation, because that's exactly what it is. As Marley said, your members of Congress represent you, and their staff is here to listen to your concerns and to take them into account when deciding which bills their boss should or should not support. So start the meeting with what I like to call a human moment by greeting those with whom you are meeting, followed by introductions. You should include your name while you're there, in this case, to speak up as a pro-choice Catholic and a supporter of Catholics for Choice, and pronouns. If you're in a larger group, designate just a few people to speak and introduce others by saying, I'm joined by X number of pro-choice Catholics in your state or district. After introductions, talk about the issue you came to address and make the ask, or simply inform the staff of what exactly you want the lawmaker to do. In the case of our upcoming lobby day, we will be asking them to support the Women's Health Protection Act. If they already support the bill, thank them and let them know that their Catholic constituents appreciate the support. If your lawmaker is supportive of abortion rights and access, reiterate your gratitude for their support and remind them that the majority of their Catholic constituents agree and want them to support this bill and others that increase abortion access. If your legislator is hostile towards abortion rights, try to avoid getting into an argument with them or their staff. It's okay to politely agree to disagree, but at the end of the day, what's most important is building a relationship and getting information. Arguing can bring all of this to a stop. Remain calm and know that you're doing the right thing by showing up and telling them how you feel. In this instance, I would also recommend using values and faith-based messaging. Start by saying something like, I know we may disagree on this issue, but please let me explain how my faith guides my support for abortion access. Regardless of how your lawmaker or their staff feels, it's difficult for them to push back when you are speaking from the heart about your most deeply held values. Everyone's story is unique, and this is your time to share yours. Please note, while this is highly unlikely, if the staffer is overly hostile or aggressive, we encourage you to end the meeting. If you're comfortable, you're welcome to hear them out and thank them for their time before doing so, but your safety and your comfort is what's most important here. If your legislator seems on the fence about this issue, again, talk about your shared values and how they are advanced by laws that support abortion access. Use what you learned during your preparation research and talk to them about something you know they care a lot about. So for instance, if your lawmaker is concerned, like all of us are, about our nation's maternal mortality and morbidity crisis, thank them for their support of legislation that would improve maternal health outcomes and let them know of the connections between this issue and abortion bans and restrictions. Policies that undermine access to abortion care and quality maternal health care are both rooted in persistent structural racism and sexism and disproportionately impact Black women. Those who are denied an abortion and gave birth later report worse health outcomes up to 5 years later as compared to those who receive the care that they want and need. And research has also found that states with higher numbers of abortion restrictions are the exact same states that have poorer maternal health outcomes. This is the type of information that may be interesting to your lawmaker and they may not know. Ask questions and listen to the answers that are provided to you. Hear what your lawmaker or their staff has to say about your ask and note any follow-up questions or materials that they need. It's easy to speak over another person when meeting virtually, so be aware of this tendency and make sure to create space for the member of Congress or their staff to speak. And perhaps be a little comfortable with some awkward silence, because that is sometimes the way that you get them to speak and let them know what they think. At the end of the meeting, again, say thank you and reiterate any next steps. Remember to stay focused, Practice time management, especially if you're doing a lobby day where you are going to multiple meetings and perhaps you want to provide yourself with a break, or you're in person and you need time to get to another visit. And remember that if you are lobbying with Catholics for Choice, you should say nonpartisan, 501c3 friendly, and talk about the issues and not a lawmaker's campaign. And most importantly, have fun. This is something that I love to do, and I think making your voice heard is so important, and it is just a great opportunity to be able to talk to your lawmakers and their staff, so have fun with it.
Great, thank you so much, Shannon. So at this point, you've set up your meeting, you've done research, you've prepared, you've gone into the meeting, you've done an awesome job of telling your story and advocating as a pro-choice Catholic. You thank them for the time and wrap up, but then what's next? So within 24 to 48 hours of your meeting, you should make sure to send a follow-up email to the people with whom you met. If you lobby at a Catholics for Choice lobby day, we can handle this for you and we'll include you on our message. But if you lobby on your own without us, we can also help you with your follow-up and would love to hear about your experiences as well. This follow-up email should thank the legislators and their offices for taking the time to meet with you, and should also include any materials that you discussed during your meeting or that a legislator requested during the meeting. Remember that advocacy is all about building relationships, so it's always a good idea to stay in touch with the staffers and the offices with whom you met even after this follow-up email. I and my colleagues are always happy to help you prepare for, schedule, or debrief from lobby visits. We're here to help you succeed and to make sure that your voices are heard, because you matter, your stories matter, and legislators really need to hear from you. So now, enough of us talking at you. Let's hear a little bit from Jessica, who has some experience lobbying with Catholics for Choice. So again, if you have any questions for Jessica, Shannon, or myself, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box on Zoom. So first off, thank you again, Jessica, for joining us today. I'm so glad you're here. So for starters, can you tell us a story about a time when you lobbied as a pro-choice Catholic? What was your favorite part and what did you learn from that experience?
Thank you so much, Marley. And yeah, that photo actually is from the time that I'm going to talk about. So that was Congressman McGovern's office that we had met with. But I actually was able to sit in on a lobby day with some folks I met during that CFC lobby day in 2019 from the Midwest. And within that conversation, I think one of the most compelling things that stuck with me was the fact that the legislator had his staff come, first of all, and the staff had come with questions, which I thought was really great. And oftentimes folks sometimes feel slighted when they're talking to legislative aides, but like everyone said, legislative aides are really involved on the ground with policy and really shape that legislator's view. So within our meeting, we were kind of I was able to hear, my colleagues with CFC and my fellow advocates talk about their own experiences, and just hearing the personal stories and how it resonated with the legislative aid was, I think, the most powerful. And that's actually something that I had written in my notes as the response, was that the personal story was really compelling, but also the fact that faith is the reason. So often people separate faith and politics, but they're so deeply interwoven. I really subscribe to the personal is political. And when we go into meetings with our faith being the center, when our faith is often used as a way to deter or fight against these policies, it really opens people's eyes in ways that they hadn't even thought of before. And I think that even the elected official that we thought, and his aide that we thought would be a little more hostile, just the way that we presented it, they were really open to a continued conversation. I think we sat with them for like 25-30 minutes, if I remember correctly.
Awesome, which doesn't sound like a long time, but legislative visits are very quick and go.
Yeah.
For people who haven't done them before, they're very busy legislators. Like their calendars are a nightmare. So the fact that they're taking time to meet with you and then want to extend it, it really just speaks to how impactful our presence is there. So that's really awesome. Can you speak a little bit about how, when, and why you first got involved with Catholics for Choice?
Yeah, I actually looked back in my email for that. And it was about 4 years ago when I connected with Catholics for Choice. And it was actually when I was volunteering with NARAL Pro Choice Massachusetts, which is now Reproductive Equity Now. And so from that, I came across Catholics for Choice. And for me, it was just like a very obvious fit. I was so excited that there were other Catholics in the world that were openly pro-choice, which I really think speaks to my why. I grew up in a Catholic household. I grew up going to Catholic camp where women were girls, really, we were all teenagers. Girls were made to feel bad in theology of the body for being on birth control. And that just wasn't the way that my faith was ever shared with me. Both of my parents are Catholic, and my dad actually converted when my parents got married and before my sister and I were born. And they always made sex and sexuality out to be a very open and beautiful thing. So for me, when I went to Catholic camp, seeing it shared in that way was just not my Catholic experience. And I have Catholic relatives who had children out of wedlock and who lived with people before they were married. So in my family, that was never an issue. And I also think back to my priest who confirmed me. I was very skeptical, pardon me, about getting confirmed because I've always been pro-abortion. I've always been pro-gay marriage, pro-choice. And I remember sitting down with my priest, Father Bill, and talking to him about how I don't subscribe to the social policy that the church does. And I don't know if I can get confirmed if that's what it means to be a Catholic. And he reiterated to me that being a Catholic is my relationship with God. And if God and I talk to each other, and I still pray every night, if we are able to have that relationship and have that connection, then that is my relationship with God. And I really believe that God gives us free will and tools and power to make the best choices for our bodies. So that's really my story and how I got involved with Catholics for Choice and why I'm so excited about the work that Catholics for Choice is doing.
I just want to say I love that so much, because I think we say a lot that Catholics for Choice strives to be a representation of Catholicism as it is lived by Catholics. And in my family is very similar. I saw my family living their faith through service to their community, through giving back to others who were more vulnerable and less fortunate than them. And that is what, our advocacy for abortion rights and access is about too. It's about making sure that everybody has the same opportunities to build their families in the way that they want to, according to their own faith and their own circumstances. Like, this is about religious freedom too, because we don't want the dictates of the hierarchy imposed upon us or upon anyone else. So I really love that.
Awesome. So going off of that, can you speak a little bit to what your experience has been like working with CFC and what you would say to someone who might be considering joining our community or getting more involved?
From my bio, you can probably assume I do a lot of activism and advocacy work. And one of the things that I really love about Catholics for Choice and what I enjoy about working with them is the ongoing support. There's really no other organization that I feel like reaches out and provides materials. And not only that, the other day, I think, not the other day, a couple weeks ago, Marley had messaged me about doing something on campus. And so being able to express my advocacy in ways that match up with what I'm currently doing. So I was able to do some advocacy work on my campus. I'm able to do a lot of social media presence. So just CFC is great at recognizing the gifts and talents and treasures that we all already have, which I think is really beautiful, considering that like God gave us those treasures and you're all giving us the tools and resources to use them. And so I would highly recommend anyone who's involved in the reproductive justice space. I am not a Catholic who regularly goes to church, and I think for me, there was this idea that I'm not Catholic enough, and you are Catholic enough, like no matter who you are, no matter if you were raised going to Catholic school, if you went to Catholic camp, if you went to church only on Christmas, our faith is influencing us all the time, whether we realize it or not. So you are Catholic enough to be in this group, and also you're Catholic enough because you care about others. Clearly you're doing reproductive justice work and it's of interest to you. So I think really being able to marry those things was what it, again, like brought me into the work and continues to bring me back 4 years later.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, I think that speaks a lot to how our approach to work is so based in those Catholic values. We try to be really genuine in showing up, building community, helping people find one another and build community with other pro-choice Catholics so that they don't feel alone, and really emphasize the beautiful diversity that lives within Catholic people and the Catholic experience.
Yeah, that actually brings me to another point, is since getting involved with Catholics for Choice and being so vocal about it on social media, I have had former Catholic camp counselors reach out to me, former bunkmates, and share with me that they're so happy that I do this work, and they're happy that they found out about this because again, Massachusetts is very progressive in terms of their reproductive policy, but still we have a long way to go. And folks were honestly really excited just to know that they weren't the only pro-choice Catholic, and just being able to open folks up to that space and letting people know that it exists, even if it's virtual, which I think is a perfectly fine medium for connecting, is just so powerful. And that's something that also really brings me joy, is women are able to be open for the first time because they kind of know that there's a group of folks behind them who also support them in Catholics for Choice.
Definitely. So shifting a little bit, based on your experience of working in a state house with the legislator, why do you think that lobbying your elected officials is important? Why isn't it enough to just like tweet at them or email them and leave it at that?
Yeah, I think especially now, like you were saying, having a digital medium makes it so much easier to connect with elected officials. But I think that there's also elected officials are looking at it from a kind of value standpoint, where it's like this person cares about this issue so much that they're also going to take time out of their day to try to meet with me. So I think that when people meet one-on-one, there's that added value of respect for your time and respect for their time. And there's almost a seriousness to that. But also too, I think that there's also the ability to create a lot more nuance and to have these deeper conversations. And that's where, honestly, as a former legislative aide, having people come to me with questions or being able to ask questions of people themselves is really powerful. And I think that there's often this idea that, oh, the person sitting across from me as a lobbyist advocate is more powerful, but you hold all the power. You're driving the conversation. You're the one really driving the position, because not only are you voting for these people, but they also represent you on issues. So even if you don't agree with them, hearing your side out allows them to either challenge their own view, I wrote this down, or reinforces their views when others oppose it.
Definitely. Oh, sorry. I think there's also a power in putting a face to a name with constituents with these issues, especially when it comes to talking about who Catholics are. When people think Catholic, they think white man, and that's just kind of the default. That's who you see. And each individual Catholic person who shows up and says, this is me, this is my face, I'm a Catholic, I'm your constituent, and this is what I care about, does a lot of work to fighting misconceptions and helping politicians know who really makes up the base of people that they were elected to represent.
Yeah, Marley, that's exactly what I was going to say. And I just want to reiterate again, we've said this a couple of times, but the power of personal stories is so reinforced when you are there in person or virtually like this, talking to them, you know. And like when we say personal stories, it doesn't have to mean that if you're comfortable, of course, and you have an abortion story or somebody in your family has had an abortion and you feel comfortable sharing that, that is amazing. But you can also share your story in that you can talk about, like Jessica talked about her family, you can talk about your faith and that how that guides you. That is so personal to you. That's your story, and this is your opportunity to share it.
Definitely. So Jessica, in your experience, how do legislators usually respond specifically when people of faith make meetings to meet with them about policy? And how do you think that that experience should inform CFC's advocacy work?
Yeah, that's where I think I would also go back to the idea of faith is seen outside of the political. So when elected officials and their aides meet with someone of faith who's talking about an issue that isn't typically or isn't bringing the issue forward in a way that they would typically imagine a person of faith to do, I think that it really goes about changing the narrative, and it also kind of, like you said, disrupts those stereotypes. Massachusetts is the second most Catholic state, so that's what I speak to. And I think about the fact that we were able to pass the Roe Act, which expanded abortion access here in Massachusetts. And a lot of that came from the fact that Catholics were saying that I'm on birth control, I've had an abortion. Also, too, I think something that was really powerful was people were also able to share their stories of maternity. And that's something else that is so personal in our faith as Catholics. We're all taught about Jesus' birth. And I think that being able to tie in faith for elected officials that's not politicized but is personal is really what brings it to life, because of course there's the separation of church and state, but our faith is always influencing us, and how our faith influences us to help others is really what is disruptive to this conversation, and what elected officials hearing is really valuable.
Definitely. And I think one thing that people often forget is how much our legislators hear from our opposition on this issue. And when it comes to abortion opposition, specifically religious folks, lobby relentlessly, both formally and informally. They use intimidation. I was once lobbying in Boston, and I talked to a legislator who had someone from their church down the street leave profane things in their mailbox in front of their house because of their view on the Roe Act that Jessica was just talking about. So you have to know without a doubt, our religious anti-choice opposition is lobbying, and there's a lot of weird things about how much they're allowed to spend on it, a lot, and how much they have to disclose of that. And just know they're working hard and spending a lot to make sure that legislators think that they are the only voice that matters in faith communities on choice. And we know that that's not true. So even more motivation to go out and speak up as a person of faith is to know that whether or not we do it, our opposition is doing it. So we need to counter them.
Yeah, and touching on that, something that Marley and Jessica touched on is that, you know, your lawmakers may be pro-choice people of faith, and you coming in and letting them know, lets them know that they're not alone. And you're also there to support them when they have, perhaps they've been denied communion by a local priest or a bishop, or they've had an experience like Marley was just talking about, like letting them know that they're not alone, that you are there and you support them, and that a majority of their Catholic and faithful constituents support them, goes a long way in building that relationship and also keeping them in the good fight.
Definitely. All right, so now we're going to shift to some questions that came in through the Q&A from the audience during the webinar and before, during registration. Shannon, Tinsley, Jessica, feel free to jump in and answer. I'll do the same, but we can just do these popcorn style. So to start off, and this can go to anyone, why do you think it is that more people don't lobby their elected officials?
I'm happy to start that. I know just simple like geographic boundaries can be an issue. Where I currently live, to get to the Massachusetts Capitol on a good day, it's about an hour and a half. And there's not great public transit. So I think that there's literally that. But then too, I think that oftentimes people forget about local constituent events. And that's where sometimes if you just search like constituent coffee or constituent meeting, you can find out when your elected official is in town, both on the federal and state level. State is often easier to connect with right in your local community. But I think now having the ability to use Zoom as well has expanded and kind of broken down that barrier, but it can be really intimidating to talk to someone who is an expert in policy where they are when you're just there sharing a personal story. But I think that it's that, oh, I'm just there sharing a personal story that people don't realize is politics. Like that is politics in action. And that really shapes policy so much. So without sounding too cliche, there's really going to the table and pulling up a chair and just sharing how you feel is enough, because it doesn't need to be a well-articulated like thesis, but I think sharing why you support an issue and how it helps your community is what's most important.
And it's definitely one of the most fun parts of politics too. Like, it sounds kind of intimidating. You picture like the Marble building and everyone dressed all fancy and the big offices, and you think it's something formal, but really it's so much fun to go in and talk to someone who you know fundamentally cares about policy and about people and caring for the community, and to talk to them person to person about who you are and what you care about at the local level, knowing that they know it affects your life every day. It's just so energizing. Like, it feels really cool afterwards to know that you made an impact. And I'm thinking back to that lobby day we did during our activist summit in 2019, and that was a tiring day. Like, it was a full day. We did a lot of meetings, probably more than we should have. Like, we were doing a lot. And at the end of it, we were all so energized. Like, once we got to talking about it, it was a formative and really cool, exciting experience for everyone. And I think that that really talks to how impactful and cool it is to realize that it's so accessible to play a part in change like this.
I think another reason why people, like constituents, don't do it as much is because of the term lobbying. Lobbying as a term has a really negative like connotation, like K Street, you know, kind of people paid a lot of money to go then pay, you know, elected officials and kickbacks. And I think that people don't understand what the term lobbying actually is, and that these K Street, you know, professionals are literally there because they're trying to intimidate the constituents from speaking to their elected officials. So it's important for constituents like us to give pushback as well.
Yeah, sometimes I prefer to call it like advocacy visits rather than a lobbying visit, because you're just advocating for yourself, you're advocating for your community and what you believe in. And I think like to what Jessica was speaking to with the distance as well, like coming to DC can be entirely cost prohibitive. If you want to meet with your federal legislators, this is an expensive city and you might not know people here or how to get around. And I also just want to say that Catholics for Choice is here to help you with that. And also with contacting the legislative staff, it can be difficult to access information on how to even get in touch with them to begin scheduling a lobby visit. So we're here to help you with all of that.
Awesome. So moving on to the next question. Again, anyone can answer it. What is the point of taking the time to meet with anti-abortion lawmakers?
I can start this one, and I really think that it goes back to what Marley was saying about don't let anti-abortion lawmakers sit in this echo chamber. Having worked on the Hill myself, I know really well that congressional offices keep a really close count of how many constituents are contacting them about a particular issue and how they feel about it. And they tend to hear most often from those who support them. So they get in this echo chamber because people are afraid to have perhaps a difficult conversation, which is why it is so important to meet with anti-abortion lawmakers and their staff, because that is your opportunity to tell them how you think and to perhaps tailor the messaging to that audience. Like perhaps, like I was saying before, they're concerned about religious liberty, and you can tell them how abortion bans and restrictions are all actually an impediment to religious liberty. As a person of faith, that means a lot coming from you. So I think that it's important that they hear from you as a pro-choice person of faith, because we don't want them to get in this idea, and it allows them to honestly say that my constituents feel this way about it because people who feel differently just aren't contacting them about it. So that's why it's so important to avoid that echo chamber.
Awesome. Next question. How often can I set up meetings with a staff from a certain office? Is there such a thing as too much? I would say no, personally. You can request as many meetings as you want. If they want to say no, they can do it. If they're too busy, they might tell you so. But they need to know that you care, and telling them that you care repeatedly will just let them know that you really care. Obviously, don't harass your politicians or go too far, but if you have an issue that you want to talk about, you're entitled and welcome to contact the people who elect you and talk about it. That's your right as a constituent. So I think the more the merrier.
Absolutely. And that's where you as a constituent and as an advocate have political capital and political power again as well. So there might be a bill that's having a hearing that you want your elected official to know about. So you might not necessarily schedule a meeting for that, but you could send an email to the staffer or your elected official that you know. I honestly often recommend that if someone is emailing their elected official, if you have a contact in that office, CC the staffer, because they're often helping to monitor the legislators' email as well. And they also, again, kind of have that more expert policy, like research ability, where the elected official has more of that like constituent knowing what's on the ground. So I think also being able to recognize when to use certain political tools in your advocacy toolbox, if you will, is really helpful. So that same bill, if you know it's already had a hearing and it's being brought to the floor, that's maybe when you would schedule a meeting, because that's where it's important for your elected official to vote on that bill. Of course, unless they're on the committee, and then that's more fun and more nuanced, but that's where someone like CFC could step in and provide support if you're not sure what's the best avenue to go, because there really are so many ways to advocate to your elected official.
Yeah, I would definitely say that like major policy moments are great moments to schedule lobby visits, like when there's an upcoming vote, an upcoming hearing. And also we had talked previously about making an ask. And I also just wanted to say that sometimes you don't need to have a super specific ask when you go on a lobby visit. Perhaps you're just doing an introductory meeting. That's like a very important relationship building tool. But usually you have an ask around major policy moments.
Awesome. The next question we'll direct at Shannon, our lobbying expert. Can you tell us a little bit about the memory of your first time lobbying and what you learned from that experience, maybe advice you wish you'd heard before it?
Yeah. My first lobbying experience was actually a long time ago. I grew up in Pennsylvania, outside of Harrisburg, which is the state capital. And my grandparents lived there, my entire family lived there their entire lives. And they did a lot of work in the community that was motivated by their faith. So I went with my grandma to go and meet with some elected officials to encourage them to fund a specific community program. So that was my first lobbying experience. And I think that what I learned from that was that that was an example of my grandma living her faith, and that was what I could do in the future too, that there are so many different ways to live your faith, and that going and talking about your faith values and lobbying your elected officials and their staffs is just part of that. And I think it created this whole like family tradition. And I just loved it. It, created this little spark in me that, you have a voice and you can use it to make a difference in your community. And another just quick note about meeting with staff versus elected officials themselves is that often it's the staff that is making these decisions about whether or not their boss should support a bill. I've been in lobby visits with legislative staff and legislators before, where the staff has said to the legislator, oh yeah, I just signed you on to like co-sponsor this bill. You know what I mean? So often they have a huge hand in these decisions. So it's very important to build this relationship with their staff and to not feel slighted at all if they want you to meet with staff versus the legislator themselves, because often that's the more influential visit.
Definitely. So we have time for one more question. I'll direct this one to Shannon as well. The question is, must one be actively Catholic to participate in our upcoming lobby day?
No, so we reached out to activists in our community first to just get some participants for the lobby day, but we've also been reaching out to partners in states where we have people of faith partners to invite them to our lobby visit. So I will say for this upcoming lobby day, we are doing friendly visits only. So kind of keep that in mind if you're thinking about if this is appropriate for you.
Awesome. Cool. So with that, our time together today has come to an end. We're just about at the hour mark. So thank you all again for being here today, for showing up, and for being willing to learn and grow in your advocacy alongside your fellow pro-choice Catholics. And thank you again to Jessica for being here. You know that Catholics for Choice adores you and are so glad to have you as part of our community. I'm very grateful to you for sharing your stories.
Thank you all for the invitation.
So in the next couple of days, everyone who registered for this webinar will receive a follow-up email, including a recording of today's events. I'll also include the slides from the PowerPoint that were requested to be included. We'll share with you some links to resources, some research that we included, and information on our upcoming lobby day, as well as information on how to join our Facebook group and the community that we're building online. So again, thank you all so much for being part of the Catholics for Choice family, and we'll see you next time.